Some people are good at arriving at the right moment. Not the cinematic kind of right moment. Not when the music swells and the lighting cooperates. The real kind. The kind where you are holding yourself together with nothing but sheer refusal in a space too small to hide an eye, and the person next to you asks exactly the question you've been dreading. This is a story about two people who lived 40 feet apart and knew almost nothing about each other, until one night made everything impossible to ignore. It is about the things we protect people from without telling them, about the kinds of danger that don't look like danger until you are already inside them, about what it costs a person to walk back into something they swore they'd left behind, and what it means to watch someone do that for you. It is not a gentle story, but it is an honest one, and it ends where the best ones do. Not with a grand gesture, not with a speech, but with someone choosing to stay. We think you'll feel this one. Subscribe so the next story finds you. And leave us a comment. Have you ever been protected by someone who never told you they were doing it? We want to know. The year Thessaly Cross turned 32, she made herself a private rule. No more asking for help. It was not born from arrogance. It was born from years of being the one people leaned on. Her mother, her friends, her younger brother Marcus, who had been stumbling through life in increasingly worrying ways since their mother passed 4 years prior, in the winter of 2020. Thessaly had arranged the funeral. Thessaly had settled the estate. Thessaly had found Marcus an apartment, co-signed the lease, and spent the 4 years since quietly making sure he didn't lose it. She was not a martyr. She was simply someone who had learned, very early, that the world does not pause for grief. She had lived in apartment 14C of the Aldermore building in downtown Chicago for 11 months. Her neighbor directly across the hall, 14B, was a man she knew only as the Korean man who came home late, kept to himself, and apparently owned 3/4 of the city based on the number of calls she overheard through walls too thin for either of their dignities. His name, according to the building directory she'd checked exactly once out of idle curiosity, was Tae-Sol Kwon. She had not intended to memorize it. On the night of March 14, 2024, Thessaly stepped into the elevator at 11:47 p.m. with a split lip, a bruised cheekbone, and the very deliberate posture of someone who has decided that what just happened did not happen. She had pressed the button for the 14th floor before she registered that she was not alone. Tae-Sol Kwon stood in the back corner of the elevator, jacket still on, the kind of stillness around him that some people mistake for calm and others, correctly, identify as control. He was not reading his phone. He was not looking at the doors. He was looking at her. Not with the theatrical alarm of a stranger witnessing something they don't know how to process. With something far more unsettling, recognition. As though he had seen this before, this particular brand of controlled damage, and had learned, at significant cost, what it meant. The elevator doors closed. He said nothing for the first 11 seconds. She counted them. Then, quietly, without drama, without making it into something she would need to perform a response to, "Who did this to you?" The question landed differently than she expected. Not accusatory, not horrified. Just direct, in the way of someone who already knows the answer isn't simple and is asking anyway because they think you deserve to be asked. "I fell." "You didn't fall. I appreciate your medical opinion." He didn't flinch at the sharpness. He absorbed it, the way she imagined he absorbed most things, quietly, with assessment. "Is there someone I should call?" "No. Are you safe in your apartment?" That one landed harder. Because yes, technically, she was safe in her apartment. The men who had come to her door looking for Marcus were not inside her apartment. They had only stood in the hallway, with their carefully worded threats and their very clear implication of what unpaid debts looked like in their world. She had closed the door on them. She had gone to her car. She had driven around for an hour before coming back. The bruise on her face was from before that, from Marcus, accidentally, in the scramble of trying to get him out before they arrived. He had shoved her into the doorframe in his panic. He hadn't meant to. She knew he hadn't meant to. Yes, I'm safe. The elevator opened on 14. She walked to her door without looking back. She heard his door, directly across the hall, open and close a moment after hers. She stood on the other side of her own door for a long time, pressing her back against it, and breathed. Marcus Cross was 28 years old in March of 2024, which meant he had been making consequential mistakes for approximately a decade, since $18, when he'd first borrowed money from people who did not call themselves lenders. He was not a bad person. Thessaly had spent enormous energy over the years, making sure she understood the distinction. Bad people were easy to stop loving. Marcus was something more complicated, a good person with bad instincts, a tender-hearted man who had never developed the emotional infrastructure to survive loss. When their mother died in December 2020, Thessaly had gone silent and organized. Marcus had gone chaotic and desperate. The debt had started small. A few thousand to cover a business idea that collapsed within 6 months. Then more, to cover the first loan. Then a different lender, at a different rate, because the first one was getting impatient. By early 2024, the number had grown into something with too many digits to say aloud without feeling sick. He had not told Thessaly the full scope until February. She had sat across from him at her kitchen table and listened without interrupting. And when he finished, she asked him, very calmly, who exactly these people were. He gave her a name she didn't recognize. She wrote it down. On the morning of March 15th, 2024, the morning after the elevator, Thessaly woke at 6:30 and went to knock on Marcus's door, because he had been sleeping on her couch for 3 days while they figured out what to do. The couch was empty. His shoes were gone. His phone went straight to voicemail. She stood in her living room in the early gray light, her bruised face aching with the cold air coming through the window she'd cracked the night before, and understood with a horrible, bone-deep certainty that they had taken him. She did not scream. She did not cry. She sat down on the floor, put her back against the couch, and thought. The name Marcus had given her was connected, she had gathered, to a network that operated somewhere between legitimate business and extortion. Organized, not inclined toward violence as a first resort, but absolutely inclined toward it as a second one. Marcus had not run. Marcus would not have left without his shoes. She got up. She made coffee. She pulled out the piece of paper with the name on it. She had one asset she had not yet deployed. She knew the building directory. She knew the name across the hall. And she had, thanks to a late-night scroll through a business news site 3 months ago when she couldn't sleep, some idea of who Taisol Kwan actually was. He knocked on her door at 8 a.m. She knew it was him before she opened it. There was a particular quality to how he knocked, deliberate and even, like someone who had made the decision and followed through without second-guessing himself. She opened the door. His eyes went immediately to her bruised cheekbone. She watched him decide not to comment on it. He held up 2 cups of coffee from the good place 3 blocks away, the one she went to on Saturdays when she had time, and offered them without preamble. I pushed last night when you didn't ask me to. That was wrong. You don't owe me anything. I'm offering anyway. She looked at him for a moment. The coffee smelled extraordinary. She stepped back from the door. He came in without making a production of it, set 1 cup on her kitchen counter, and stood where he could see both the door and the window, which she noticed, and filed away. Some people positioned themselves in rooms that way, usually because someone had once taught them why. My brother is missing. She had not planned to say it. It came out the same way the decision to step back from the door had, without deliberation, which was unusual for her, and told her something about how frightened she actually was underneath the organized surface. He processed without alarm. Since when? This morning. He was on my couch. Now he isn't, and his phone is off. Is this connected to last night? She picked up the coffee. What do you know about a group operating in this city, connected to real estate and import businesses on the surface, less legitimate things underneath? They use a name. She said the name Marcus had given her. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise. The opposite of surprise. The particular stillness of someone who recognizes a name they hoped not to hear. She saw it happen. She watched him decide whether to lie. He didn't. Where did you hear it? My brother owed them money. Significant money. They came to my door last night. She touched the side of her face, briefly. I was trying to get him out before they arrived. The bruise is from him, not them. He panicked. I don't want you to misread the situation. Taesol set his coffee down on her counter with a care that looked like the kind of control a person exercises when their hands want to do something else. How much does he owe? She told him the number. He was quiet for a long time. The morning light came through her windows, and the city noise rose from 14 floors below, and neither of them moved. Sit down. Not a command. A request from someone who understood she might refuse. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. His name was Jinho Yun. He had been Taesol's closest friend since they were 23 years old and sharing a one-bedroom apartment in Seoul. Two young men from modest backgrounds who had built something from nothing through ambition, timing, and the particular recklessness that belongs to people with nothing to lose. Taesol had made his money legitimately, or mostly legitimately, with the asterisk that in the early years, the lines between legitimate and otherwise were sometimes drawn by whoever was holding the pen. He had worked to move his businesses fully above board by the time he turned 30. He had been 30 in 2017. He was now 37. Jinho had not made the same transition. He had stayed in the world they had both originally moved through, where capital moved without too many questions, and favors were currency, and the people you knew were more valuable than anything you owned. He had grown comfortable there. He had built his own network, adjacent to some of the same players, including, Taesol noted this carefully, watching her face, some of the same network that Marcus's debt had ended up in. I didn't know about your brother specifically. I want to be clear about that. But I knew this network operated in this city. I knew approximately what they did. And I made a decision, after Jinho died in 2021, that I was going to be done. Done knowing. Done watching. Done letting the proximity of it be any part of my life. He died because of them. He died because of choices he made inside that world. Choices I watched him make for years and said nothing about, because saying something would have meant acknowledging I was close enough to see them. A pause. I told myself it was his life, his decisions. I told myself a lot of things. Thessaly had been listening the way she listened to everything important, completely still, taking in the full shape of it before responding to any part. She did this now. You've been carrying this for 3 years. Not a question. It didn't feel like carrying. It felt like having stopped. That's not the same thing. He looked at her. Something in his expression shifted. Not gratitude exactly, but the particular quality of being accurately seen by someone you weren't expecting to see you. No? A quiet admission. It's not. She stood. She walked to her window and looked out at the city. And he waited, which was another thing she noticed. He was very good at waiting. He didn't fill silence. He let it be what it was. Can you reach them? The network. The people who have Marcus. The question sat between them like something breakable. He understood what she was actually asking. Not just for the action, but for the cost of it. To do this, he would have to open a door he had spent 3 years sealing shut. He would have to be, again, the version of himself he had worked very hard to leave behind. Yes, but not yet. Let me find out where Marcus is first. If I go in making demands before I know what position we're in, I'll make it worse. How long? A day, maybe 2. She turned from the window. Okay, Okay. I'm trusting you. Don't make me regret it. She picked up her coffee. Also, you pushed last night, and you were right to push. Both things are true. I wanted you to know I see that. The corner of his mouth moved. It was barely a smile, but it was real. Noted. The next 36 hours operated on a kind of suspended logic that Thessaly would later recognize as the specific atmosphere of shared crisis. The way proximity under pressure either repels people or pulls them into an intimacy that has nothing to do with circumstance, and everything to do with who you actually are when the performance falls away. He had suggested she move into his apartment temporarily. The people who had come to her door knew where she lived. She had refused for approximately 4 hours before admitting to herself that refusing was pride, not strategy. His apartment was not what she expected. She had built a vague mental image, sharp lines, expensive emptiness, the aesthetic of a man who cared more about square footage than warmth. What she found instead was organized but lived in. Books stacked in ways that suggested they were actually read. A kitchen that showed evidence of real cooking. One wall of his study covered in a map of the city annotated in both Korean and English, with handwriting that was small and precise. He gave her the bedroom without discussion. She found this annoying, because it was harder to maintain a defensive posture toward someone who handled logistics with quiet consideration and didn't need acknowledgement for it. She slept badly, not because the bed was uncomfortable. It was exceptional, which was its own irritation, but because every time she drifted off, she snapped awake with the image of Marcus's empty couch. At 2 a.m, she gave up and went to the kitchen, and found Taesol already there, standing at the window with a glass of water. The city laid out below him in lights. He heard her come in. He didn't turn. She looked at his back. You don't sleep. He answered without moving. I sleep. Not well, lately. She sat at his kitchen counter and pulled her knees up to her chest, and they stayed like that for a while. Her behind him facing the window, in a silence that was somehow not uncomfortable, which bothered her on principle. What was he like? She asked eventually. Jin-ho. He considered it with the seriousness it deserved. Generous, chaotic. He laughed at everything, including things that weren't funny. And sometimes that was the only thing that made the unfunny things survivable. A pause. He was careless with himself in ways I thought were personality. I understand now they were symptoms. But understanding that now doesn't give you anything to do with it, she finished. Yes. I know that feeling. I've been watching Marcus be careless with himself for 10 years, and calling it his right to live how he wanted, and telling myself that wasn't just me not knowing how to make him stop. We're not so different, you and I. We're very different. In the important ways, he agreed. But in this one, no. She considered arguing. She decided it wasn't worth it, because he was right. She went back to bed at 3. The hours between 2 and 3 she carried quietly afterward, the way you carry things that don't yet have a category. She had told herself that what she was observing about Taesol Kwan was operational data, the kind you collect about someone whose cooperation you need. She was good at that. She had always been good at reading rooms, people, the weight of what wasn't being said. But somewhere in that kitchen, in the dark, at 2:15 in the morning, she had been watching him stand at the window and found herself noticing things that were not operational. The way he held himself even in private, not performance, just structure, as though the composure was so internal it didn't require an audience. The way he had spoken about Jin-ho with the specific care of someone handling something that could still break. The way he let the silence be exactly what it was, without trying to reshape it into something more comfortable. She had learned, over the years, to distrust people who couldn't be quiet, who needed noise and movement and conversation to avoid sitting inside their own skin. She had learned to trust the ones who could stop. He could stop. He could be entirely still and not make a statement of it. She noticed that. She wished she hadn't, because it made the landscape of the next few days more complicated than it needed to be. And she had enough complicated. She was still angry. She needed to be precise about that in her own mind. The anger was real and earned, and was going to take time to move through, and she was not going to skip that process for anyone. But anger and something warmer are not, unfortunately, mutually exclusive. She had long since made peace with the fact that her feelings didn't always arrive in a logical order. She filed it. She left it in the part of her mind labeled later. She slept. Finally. Until 6. When her phone rang. The call was from a number she didn't recognize, and it was brief. A man's voice, carefully neutral, telling her that Marcus was fine, that they wanted their money, and that she had 72 hours to produce a resolution, or Marcus would stop being fine. She recorded the last 40 seconds on her phone. She played it for Tai Sol. He listened twice. I know that voice. Whose is it? Someone adjacent to the main operation. Not the decision maker. He handed her phone back. This is actually useful. It means they're still in negotiation mode. If they'd already decided on a harder approach, they wouldn't have called. 72 hours. 72 hours. She spent the morning making calls of her own. To Marcus's landlord, to 2 of his friends, to a cousin in Milwaukee who hadn't seen him in months. Building a picture of the last few weeks. Looking for anything that told her how deep this had actually gone. What she found instead compounded things. An article from a financial news site dated October 2019. A profile of an emerging investment firm built in part with early capital from a network of Korean American investors in Chicago. The article was unremarkable except for one thing. The network it mentioned was described using language vague enough to be legal and specific enough to be clear to anyone who knew what to look for. And the acknowledgments section included a name she now knew, Tae-Sol Kwon, alongside 3 others, one of which matched the name Marcus had given her. She closed her laptop. She sat for a long time. Then she walked to his study doorway and waited while he finished a call. He came out and saw her face and understood immediately that something had changed. You knew. Her voice was very steady, which was, she recognized, more frightening than if she were shouting. Not that it would reach me specifically, not Marcus's name, but you knew this network. You weren't just adjacent through Jin Ho. You had business with them. He didn't pretend not to know what she was referring to. In 2019, a single transaction, capital investment, no ongoing relationship. I ended it when I realized what they were fully connected to. That was 5 years ago, and you've been living 40 feet away from someone being circled by them and said nothing. I didn't know they were connected to you. You knew they existed. You chose not to. The steadiness in her voice sharpened. Your friend died because of that world, and your response was to make yourself comfortable with not knowing. And now my brother is gone because of that world. I need to understand whether I can trust you to actually care about that, or whether you're going to protect yourself again. The silence was absolute. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He stood in his own hallway and absorbed every word and let it be what it was. You're right. She waited. Everything you said is accurate. I made choices that prioritized my own distance over anything else. I told myself it was neutrality. You named it correctly. It was cowardice. A pause. I can't undo it. I can tell you that what I'm doing now isn't about clearing my conscience. It's because it's the right thing to do, and I should have been doing the right thing for a long time. That's not enough for me to trust you. I know, but I don't have better options. I know that too. She looked at him for a long moment. The anger was still there. She was not someone who burned through anger quickly, and she didn't pretend to. But underneath it was something she didn't want to name yet. The recognition that he had told the truth, the whole truth, without softening it. That was not nothing. Find my brother. The words landed flat and clear. We can have whatever conversation needs to happen after. Yes. She went back to the kitchen. He went back to his phone. They did not speak again for 4 hours. And still, against her own preferences, she stayed. On the second day, while Taesol worked his way through a network of contacts he had not called in 3 years, Thessaly did something she had not told him she was going to do. She called the number that had called her. She had thought it through carefully. She was not reckless. She was the opposite of reckless, which meant she understood the difference between a calculated risk and a foolish one, and she had decided this was the former. She arranged a meeting, a coffee shop in a neighborhood she didn't usually frequent, public enough that nothing dramatic could happen, quiet enough that they could talk. The man who arrived was not what she expected. Not physically intimidating, not theatrical. Mild, neatly dressed, with the particular patience of someone who had been doing this long enough that it had stopped being interesting. She presented him with a number, her own savings, not enough to cover the full debt, but enough to demonstrate she was serious about resolution. She proposed a payment structure for the remainder. She was direct, prepared, and she did not let her voice shake. He smiled at her, not warmly, and explained that she didn't understand how this worked. She was explaining that she understood exactly how it worked when 2 men appeared at her table who had not been there 30 seconds before. The mild man said, very quietly, that she should come with them. She did not go quietly. She also, being honest with herself later, did not escape. What followed was approximately 8 minutes of controlled fear in the back of a parked car 2 blocks away, during which the mild man explained their position again, more clearly, and she repeated her offer, which he declined again, and the car door opened and she was released onto the sidewalk with no physical harm done, and the very clear understanding that a point had been made. Her phone, which she had left in her jacket pocket with a call running, had connected to Taesol's number 20 minutes prior. He was standing outside the building when she got back. She had never seen him look like that before. The control was still there, apparently structural, bone deep, but something underneath it was running very hot. He watched her walk toward him, and she could see him cataloging the fact that she was unhurt, and she watched the temperature underneath drop to something more manageable. I had a plan. I heard your plan. It didn't entirely work. No. He held the door, but they still haven't decided to escalate beyond pressure, which tells us something. They want the money. They want the money. Marcus is still leverage, which means Marcus is still alive and unharmed. They stepped into the elevator. He looked at the doors. Don't do that again without telling me first. I make my own choices. I'm not disputing that. Telling me is different from asking permission. He didn't look at her, but the quality of his stillness shifted. If something had happened to you in that car, I would have... He stopped. She looked at him sideways. You would have what? He didn't finish it, but she had heard the beginning, and she filed it away in the part of herself that was still paying attention to things that weren't crisis management. Next time I'll tell you, she offered. Thank you. The elevator opened on 14. That night, Taesol made 7 calls. Thessaly didn't hear all of them. He took most in his study with the door half closed, and she was not the kind of person to position herself to listen. But she heard enough. She heard the code switching, the particular register he used with certain people, different from the formal version she'd occasionally overheard through the wall. She heard silences on his end that told her what the other side of the conversation must sound like. She heard him, once, say Jinho's name, just the name, and then silence for a long time. At midnight he came out of his study and sat on the couch, and she handed him the tea she had made approximately 20 minutes before, because she had calculated it would take him roughly this long to finish. He looked at the mug, and then at her, and did not comment on it. I know where Marcus is, and I know who's holding him. It's not the mild man from the coffee shop. He's a collector. The actual decision-maker is someone I haven't spoken to in 3 years. Did you speak to him tonight? Someone who can reach him. What does he want? A conversation, in person. He wrapped both hands around the mug. With me, not with you. They want me there because I'm the variable they don't fully understand. They want to assess whether I'm a threat or an opportunity. What are you? He was quiet for a moment. Neither. I'm someone who has something they want more than the debt. What do you have? Information about a competitor's operation. Something I've been holding for 3 years because I didn't know what to do with it and didn't want to be involved. He set the mug down. I'm going to trade it. She understood what this meant. He was going to trade the last thing keeping him at a distance, his neutrality, his plausible remove from all of it. After this, there was no version of himself he could maintain that hadn't been actively involved. It wouldn't be visible to the outside world, but he would know. This costs you something, she observed. Yes. The version of yourself you've been trying to be. He looked at her steadily. I think I stopped actually being that version a while ago. I was just maintaining the performance of it. A pause. You said something. The cowardice dressed as neutrality. I've been thinking about that since you said it. I think you were more right than you knew. I usually am, she replied, without humor. The corner of his mouth moved. Yes, I'm beginning to understand that. She sat back. The apartment was quiet. The city below had gone to its late-night rhythm. I want to come with you. No. Tae-sol. Not because I think you can't handle it. Because if you're there, they have leverage over me in the room. If I go alone, I have a cleaner position. He looked at her directly. You being safe is part of my negotiation. Don't take that off the table. She hated how logical it was. Fine, but you call me the second it's done. The second it's done. She went to bed. She lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man who had spent 3 years trying to be someone who didn't have to carry what he carried and who was now, one phone call at a time, becoming someone who did. She thought about what it meant that this moved something in her, and she left it, for now, where it was. She fell asleep just before dawn. He went alone on the morning of March 17th, 2024, the 3rd day since Marcus had disappeared. The meeting was in a restaurant closed for renovations for 6 months, which gave it exactly the right combination of apparent legitimacy and total privacy. Tae-sol arrived first, by design. He sat at a table near the center of the empty room and arranged himself the way he arranged himself for every meeting that mattered. Still, unhurried, with the specific quality of attention that could be mistaken for disinterest, but was actually its opposite. The man who arrived was named Seo Junho. He was 51 years old. He had been operating in Chicago for 12 years. Tae-sol had met him twice before, once in 2018, once in 2019, the year of the article Thessaly had found. He was the kind of man whose danger lived entirely in the gap between how reasonable he appeared and what he was actually capable of. They greeted each other with a formality that was about establishing terms before any words were spoken. I was curious when I heard your name, Seo said, in Korean. I thought you'd excised yourself. I had, Tae-sol answered, in English, a small assertion of ground. This situation made that impractical. The woman. The man, Marcus Cross. He borrowed money he didn't understand from people he didn't fully assess. He made a bad decision out of desperation. That's the full extent of his crime. The money will be paid. Tae-sol set a folder on the table. Full amount, within 30 days. I'll guarantee it personally. SEO looked at the folder without opening it. That's generous. Why would you do that for a stranger? He isn't a stranger to someone I care about. A pause. SEO absorbed this without expression. You care about the sister? Tae-sol said nothing. which was its own kind of confirmation. There's a second thing, Taisol continued. The information I mentioned through the intermediary. It involves a network operating in your space, in 3 cities, who have been systematically misrepresenting their operations to the people above you. He named the network. He named 2 of the cities. He watched Sio's expression do the thing that expressions do when someone is confirming a suspicion they've held for a long time. I have documentation. Jin-ho gave it to me 2 weeks before he died. He wanted someone to hold it who wasn't inside the system. I've been holding it for 3 years because using it meant being involved again. And now I have a reason to stop waiting. The room was very quiet. The city moved outside the windows. Seo opened the folder and read for 3 minutes without speaking. Then he closed it. The man is released today. The debt is settled on the terms you've proposed. He looked up. And I want to be clear. This closes the account entirely. Your name, her name, his name. No further interest. Agreed. They shook hands with the careful gravity of men who understood they were concluding something that had been open too long. Taisol walked out into the cold March morning and stood on the sidewalk and breathed. He pulled out his phone. He called Thessaly. She picked up on the first ring. It's done. Marcus will be released within the hour. I'll text you the address. The silence on her end lasted exactly 4 seconds. He heard something in it that he didn't have the vocabulary for yet. Something that sounded like the specific exhale of someone who has been holding their breath for 72 hours. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. There's a conversation we haven't finished. I know. A pause. Come home. He stood on the sidewalk after she'd hung up and sat with the word, home, and what it meant that she'd used it, and what it meant that it didn't feel wrong. Marcus was released at 11:15 that morning, in a parking garage in Wicker Park, where a woman Taisol had sent was waiting with a car. He arrived at Taisol's apartment at noon, and Thessaly opened the door. And the way she looked at her brother, the specific combination of relief and fury, and the kind of love that has no good word in English, was something Taisol witnessed from across the room and quietly looked away from, because it was not his to see. He made himself scarce. He went to his study and let them have the hours they needed. Marcus had been kept not uncomfortably but completely isolated. No phone, no news, no sense of time. He had not been hurt. He had been terrified, which was the point. He had also been carrying a shame so enormous that he had spent months convincing himself it was manageable rather than tell his sister the true scope of it. He had borrowed the money, initially, to cover medical debt. Their mother's bills, the ones that had come after her death, that the estate hadn't been able to fully absorb, the ones that had been quietly threatening to become Thessaly's problem for 4 years. Marcus had intercepted them. He had not told her. He had borrowed money from the wrong people to protect her from a burden, and the protection had become a larger burden, and somewhere in the spiral he had lost the thread of how to get out. Thessaly sat with this for a long time before responding. You should have told me. I know. I'm not fragile, Marcus. I never was. I know. His voice was very quiet. I was trying to give you something back. The way you were always giving me things. I didn't know how to do it without making it worse. She was silent. Then, against what was probably her first instinct, she reached across the table and put her hand over his. The gesture was not soft. It was firm and deliberate, the way she did everything. But it was there. They talked for a long time. Taisol heard the shape of it from his study. The rises and falls, the occasional silence. 2 people navigating something that would take years to fully resolve but was beginning, today, to have a shape they could both hold. At 4 p.m, Marcus left, to a hotel Taisol had arranged, something quiet and clean, with the instruction to sleep and eat and not make any decisions for 24 hours. He agreed with the docility of someone who had run entirely out of the energy required to argue. When Thessaly came to his study doorway, she leaned against the frame and looked at him for a moment. He borrowed the money for me, for our mother's bills. He was trying to take care of me. I heard, whole family of people who don't know how to let anyone else carry anything. She crossed her arms. I wonder where we learned that. He turned his chair to face her. How are you? I don't know yet. She looked at him steadily. What did you trade? In that room. Don't minimize it. He told her. The information, the documentation, what it had cost Jinho's memory to use, and what it cost his own carefully constructed distance from all of it. She listened the way she always listened, completely, without interrupting. Her voice slowed. He gave you that information. Jinho. 2 weeks before he died. Yes. He trusted you with it. He trusted me to hold it. I don't know if he expected me to use it. He gave it to you. Her voice was quiet, but certain. That's not the same as just holding it. He knew you'd know when. Taesol had not thought about it that way. He considered it now, for the first time, and felt something shift. Some weight that had been sitting at a particular angle for 3 years, find a slightly different position. Not gone, not resolved, but adjusted. You're going to be okay. She looked at him directly. I want to be clear. I'm still angry. About the years of chosen distance. I haven't moved past that, and I won't pretend to. But you walked back into something terrible for someone you didn't owe anything to. I watched you do it. I'm factoring that in. I owed you more than I gave, for longer than I realized. Yes, you did. A pause. I bet you paid some of it back. He stood. Neither of them moved for a moment. Across the distance of his study, the late afternoon light coming through the windows, the city going about its business below. There's still a conversation to have. I know. Not today. No. She nodded once. I'm going to go get changed and take a walk. I need to be outside. She paused at the door. I'll be back. The last 3 words were so quiet he almost missed them. He didn't. There is a particular kind of exhaustion that arrives after a crisis resolves. Not the exhaustion of effort. That kind is clean. It has a clear cause and a clear cure. This is the other kind. The exhaustion of held tension finally releasing all at once, which turns out to feel less like relief and more like the moment after a long scream when your throat is raw and the silence is enormous. Thessaly moved back across the hall 3 days after Marcus was released. She did not announce it. She packed her things while Taesol was in a call, left the key he'd given her on his kitchen counter, and moved back into 14C. The key was followed, 20 minutes later, by a text. I needed to sleep in my own space again. Thank you for the room. His reply came within minutes. Of course. The offer stands if you need it. She put her phone down and looked at her own apartment, the exact shape of her own life, undisturbed, waiting, and felt, quite suddenly, the full weight of the past week land in her body all at once. She sat down on her couch and did not move for 40 minutes. This was, she thought, what people got wrong about strong people. They assumed strength meant not needing to sit still and feel it. What it actually meant was that you could hold the feeling without being destroyed by it. But you still had to feel it. Skipping that part had consequences. She let herself be afraid, for the first time without the task of managing it, about how close it had come. Marcus's empty couch at 6:30 in the morning, the car in Wicker Park, the 72-hour deadline ticking with something like teeth. She let herself feel the specific terror of that, cleanly and completely, and when she was done, she let it go. She thought about her mother, about the bills Marcus had intercepted, the debt he had taken on in both their names, in the spirit of a love their mother had modeled without meaning to. Carry and don't tell. Their mother, who had held everything quietly until holding it cost her more than she had. She was 32. Her mother had been 58 when she died. If she was lucky, Thessaly had another quarter-century to unlearn the lesson that asking for help meant you were less. She picked up her phone and called Marcus. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and careful in the way it would be for a while. That specific post-crisis register of someone still recalibrating what normal felt like. She said it plainly, without preamble. "I'm not angry." A beat of silence. Then, "You don't have to say that." "I know. That's why I'm saying it." She pulled her knees up. "I'm not angry about why you started. I understand it. I would have done the same thing and called it love. The part where it escalated and you still didn't tell me. That's going to take longer. I know. But the first part, the bills, why you began, I get it. You were trying to give something back. I understand that." She heard him exhale, a long exhale, the kind that must have been living in his chest for weeks. "I'm going to be okay." Not with false brightness, with the tentative quality of someone who had just begun, for the first time, to believe it. "I know," she said. "I've always known that about you, even when you couldn't see it yourself." They talked for another 20 minutes about small things. His first appointment with a therapist, the bookshop job, a novel he'd started, the texture of a life that was, carefully, recommitting to being lived. When she hung up, the apartment was quiet in the ordinary way, not the quiet of held breath. Just a Thursday evening. The hardest forgiveness, she had always believed, was the kind you gave people who weren't entirely wrong. Marcus had made terrible decisions, and the most loving possible decision, at the same time, in the same action. And those two things could not be separated. She had to forgive both, the love and the damage of it, as one indivisible thing. She was beginning to understand that this was also, in a different shape, what she was being asked to do with the man across the hall. 3 years of chosen distance and 1 week of chosen presence, and neither half canceled the other out. She had to hold the whole of him if she was going to hold any of him. She was not ready yet. But the door, she noticed, was no longer bolted. In the weeks that followed, Tysol dealt with the consequences of what he'd done in that restaurant, with the particular focused competence that was his primary mode. There was nothing illegal about what he'd traded. It was information, given voluntarily, about criminal activity, but in the world he'd built his professional life in, the optics of being connected to any of it were corrosive. The story came out in pieces, the way these things do. A financial journalist picked up on the thread. The documentation made its way to law enforcement through channels that didn't include Tysol's name, but the connections were not invisible to anyone who knew how to look. His board asked for a meeting. He attended and told the version of the truth that was true. He had held information about criminal activity for 3 years and had used it to prevent harm to a civilian. He had been wrong to hold it as long as he had. He did not apologize for using it. 2 board members resigned in protest. 3 others, the ones who had been with him the longest, stayed. He gave an interview to the journalist who had broken the story. He did not minimize. He described what he'd known, when he'd known it, and what he'd chosen to do with that knowledge. He did not make himself the hero of it. The interview was the most uncomfortable 20 minutes of his professional life, and he had spent 20 minutes in a room with Seo Junho 4 days prior. Thessaly read the interview on a Tuesday morning, sitting at her own kitchen counter. She had moved back across the hall within a week of Marcus's release, which was the right call, and she knew it, even as she registered the specific oddness of 40 feet feeling like more distance than it had before. She read it twice. Then she sent him a text. This was honest. You should be proud of it. His reply came 3 minutes later. I'm not sure proud is the right word. She thought about it, then typed, relieved, then, that the truth is out and it didn't destroy you. A longer pause. Then, yes, that. She set her phone down and drank her coffee, and thought about what it meant that she had read the interview looking for whether she believed him. And she had. That her own verdict had mattered enough to read it twice. She was still angry. She had decided not to pretend otherwise. Not to herself. Not to him. 3 years of chosen distance didn't dissolve in a week because the endgame had been good. She was the kind of person who required time to move through things, and she moved through them completely, or not at all. But underneath the anger and the still-present grief, and all the accumulated weight of the past weeks, she was also something else, something warmer and more inconvenient. She did not rush it. Marcus called every day. He was in therapy, a condition she had made clear was non-negotiable, not as punishment, but as care. He was working part-time at a bookshop on the north side. He sounded, for the first time in years, like someone actually present in his own life rather than running from it. Spring arrived in the way Chicago springs always do, suddenly, improbably, as though the city had simply decided to be done with winter by fiat. She started leaving for work without a coat. She started sleeping through the night. She started noticing, again, the small rhythms of her floor, the pattern of a door across the hall, the hours that were late and the hours that were early. She did not rush it, but she stopped pretending not to notice. 6 months after the night of March 14th, on a September evening in 2024, when the city had gone amber and cool and the trees along the street below had just begun to turn, Thessaly came home from dinner with a friend and stepped into the elevator of the Aldermore building at 8:43 p.m. She was smiling. Not the controlled, deliberate expression she wore at work or in negotiation, or in any of the situations that required management. A real smile, the kind that shows up when you've had a good conversation with someone you love, and the food was excellent, and the evening air hit you just right on the walk home. Teisel was already in the elevator. He had been coming from the lobby, a delivery he'd gone down to collect himself, which she had noticed over the past 6 months was something he did when he wanted an excuse to be moving. She had not pointed this out. She had simply filed it. He saw the smile before she could put it anywhere. He said nothing. But something in his expression, that controlled, quiet surface, did something she had never seen it do. It opened. Just slightly. The way a door opens when someone on the other side has finally decided to try the handle. They rode to the 14th floor in a silence that was familiar now. Had been familiar for months. The 40 feet between them had been negotiated, gradually and without announcements, into something else. Something not quite defined, but with clear enough edges that they could both move within it without colliding. Dinners twice a week that had started as her cooking for both of them because she cooked when she was processing things, and there had been a lot to process. Evenings on his couch with separate books, the specific comfortable quiet of two people who did not need to fill every moment with words. His hand at the small of her back in the elevator 3 weeks ago, briefly, with her full awareness, and without either of them making it into a conversation it wasn't ready to be. The elevator opened. She stepped out. He stepped out. They stood in the hallway between their two doors, and she looked at him in the light from the sconces. This man who had walked back into something terrible and come out of it more himself than when he went in. And she thought about all the conversations still ahead of them, and all the things not yet resolved, and the anger that had mostly, finally, metabolized into something she could hold without being held by it. I made dinner. There's extra. He looked at her for a moment. The question in it was not about dinner. Yes. She unlocked her door. He followed her in, and she didn't look back to check if he was there, because she already knew. And that, she realized, was the thing. Not certainty about how it would go or what they were becoming. The simpler thing, she had stopped checking whether he would show up, because he always did now. She put a bowl of food in front of him, He looked at it, and then at her, and there it was again. That opening, that real thing underneath all the control. A quiet, "Thank you." She sat across from him, and outside the window the Chicago evening went on in all its amber and noise and forward motion, and neither of them said anything important for a long time. That was exactly right. Some things don't need a declaration. Some things just need time and honesty, and two people willing to stop pretending the door between them is closed when both of them have been standing on the threshold for months. She had watched him choose, when it cost something real, to be the kind of man worth staying for. He had watched her choose, again and again, to be exactly who she was, without apology, without performance, without softening herself for anyone's comfort. And now they sat across from each other at her kitchen table, on an ordinary September evening, in the specific warmth of two people who have already survived the worst of each other, and chosen, quietly and without ceremony, to stay anyway. That was enough. That was everything. If Thessaly and Tysol found you somewhere real, subscribe so you're here for the next story. And leave us a comment. Which moment stayed with you longest? Every single one gets read.